been seen before. The question is not if it will happen, because the process has already begun. The only question is how much time is left until the climax. Now, while this process will lead to, unfortunately, financial ruin for those who are uneducated and unaware of what is happening, it also represents the greatest wealth transfer in the history of humankind for those who do. Now, despite the fact that an event like this seems out of the realm of possibility for most, it is actually quite common. It's happened hundreds of times over thousands of years, and it always unfolds through the same 7-stage progression that encapsulates the life cycle of a nation, which I'm going to share with you guys right now. Stage number 1, if y'all want to take notes. A country starts out with good money, which is either gold or backed by gold, just as the United States did in 1848 under the Independent Treasury Act. Moves on to stage number 2, and as it develops economically and socially, it begins to take on more and more economic burdens, adding layer upon layer of public works programs and social programs. It enters stage number 3, and as its economic affluence grows, so does its political influence. It increases expenditures to fund a massive military. Stage number 4, it eventually puts that military to use and expenditures explode. Now, despite the fact that this chart is from 2008, it clearly shows the massive disparity between the military spending of the US and the rest of the world. Stage number 5, to fund these wars, which are the costliest of all of man's endeavors, it steals the wealth of its people by replacing their money with currency that can be created in unlimited quantities. It usually does this at the outbreak of war, as in the case of World War I, during a war, as in the case of Vietnam, or as a perceived solution to previous wars, as Germany did after World War I. In stage number 6, finally, the wealth transfer caused by the expansion of the currency supply is felt by the population as severe consumer price inflation, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. And then finally, it enters stage 7, and an en masse movement out of the currency into precious metals and other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapses, and massive wealth is transferred to those who had enough foresight and knowledge to position their money to the right asset class beforehand. Now, as I'll demonstrate later in this presentation, the United States is sitting right between stage 6 and stage 7. So to get a complete picture of this process, we really need to turn back to the year 1914. This is the year that marks the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, some of you, in fact, in this room, because this has become a popular topic over the last 12 months, know that the Federal Reserve is not a government-owned institution. It is in fact a private bank. It has private stockholders, and it pays this group of people an annual dividend of 6%. It's completely separate from the government. It is accountable to absolutely no one. It has never been audited, and has the power to dictate the nation's financial policy and print our currency. So in effect, it controls the money supply of the United States and therefore the entire world, because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, as we all know. Now, the idea for this private bank was actually created in 1910 when Senator Nelson Aldrich decided to take some time off and invite a few of his friends to go duck hunting with him on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. These friends included investor Paul Warburg, this is them right here, the Assistant Treasury Secretary Abraham Andrew, President of the Rockefeller-led National City Bank of New York, Frank Vanderlip, Henry Davison, and Benjamin Strong of J.P. Morgan. Now, over the next 9 days, these men created the blueprint for the Federal Reserve and brought it to life. And ever since that moment, the United States of America has not been by the people or for the people, and the concepts of freedom and democracy became nothing more than an illusion. Why is that? Because for the past 96 years, every single dollar in our economy has come from this private bank with private investors, and who profit from the interest the U.S. Treasury must pay them on every single dollar the Federal Reserve creates out of thin air and then loans to the government. So I want you to think about that for a minute, because there are probably only a few tens of thousands of Americans who really understand what that actually means. And in my opinion, it means that the country known as the United States of America is actually privately owned. Every single house, building, car, and bank in this country is owned by a small group of people who own the Federal Reserve Bank. Cash, which is formally called Federal Reserve notes, isn't money owned or printed by the United States government. It's printed by this private bank. So we are literally not carrying around our own national currency that has been printed by our democratically elected government. We are carrying around these private bankers' money. There's the label right at the top. So the real irony is that we can never escape this cycle because we borrow every single dollar into the world, which we now owe the Federal Reserve Bank interest on. So the US government can't print its own money, so the only way that they can make the interest payments on these Federal Reserve notes is to borrow more Federal Reserve notes, which then accumulates more interest. And that is why every major economy in the world runs a constant deficit. It's literally the largest Ponzi scheme ever created, and like every single Ponzi scheme ever created, there's only one way that it always comes to an end. And we're going to go over that here today. Now, as bad as this sounds, we're not completely doomed